I will talk on the next topic, like I said, being mobility. How do we look at the traffic and understanding the traffic and mobility systems in a city related to urban planning? So, first of all, and again, I'm not going to try to go all the way down into the details of the technology, but I just wanted to give you a high-level introduction as to what a normal mobility simulation, what do we mean by that? Well, what we have discovered, at least in Norway, is that we're looking at 3 levels of understanding the traffic in the society. We have a micro level being very, very detailed, including all the geometry of the roads and crosses and whatnot. You want to experiment and explore something very, very detailed when you do some changes and build road infrastructure. Then the next level up is about visualizing and doing simulations on a larger area of the traffic, being a city, for instance, but it's not including all the complex details around, like I said, road geometry and crosses. And then at the top level, there are some macro level providers looking at regional transport and traffic flow between larger areas, for instance, between 2 cities or between 2 regions. And I can say as much as our solution is a meso-level simulation model. And I will only say be as technical as this, but it's built on something called agent. It's called agents, and it's built on a technology from Matsim. So if you're interested in more details around that, I'm happy to provide that, but I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that technology for the sake of this call. So this solution, which is important for today, is that it's designed for larger areas, like I said, like cities, and focusing on the systemic level, trying to understand the impact of traffic and the infrastructure in a larger area. What we are able to do is that with the foundational road network, and I'm going to show that in a few cases just in a second, but we can go in and do changes on parameters and test different scenarios and analyze and understand what are the consequences on doing changes on our mobility infrastructure. Some of the input or the parameters, the input data that we're able to use is population. What happens if we have a growth or a very big decline in population in one area of a city? Or what happens if there is built a very new facility with a lot of new people that are starting to work, so they have to travel a new pattern to go from their home to work? What happens if we change the travel habits of the citizens in a city? We know that we have a lot of CO2 emissions from the current traffic situation. How much do we need to change the travel habits of our citizens in the cities around the world to make it more sustainable? And the origin destination matrix is really something technical as a foundation behind this. It means that we know where people live, where they work, where they go for their leisure activities, etc. And this is really just a fundamental piece of information that we can, we use it as a baseline input, but we can also go ahead and change that. What happens if we change the whole thing of travel patterns and where people are going for both their work and other types of activities? Again, I'm happy to provide more input on details on this, but for the cause of this call, I'm not going to go into a much broader detail on that. So the first case I want to present to you is from the next largest city in Norway, it's called Bergen. It has a population of 287,000 people living there. And what's special about this city is that, well, there are three main ways to enter this city, and it's really surrounded by mountains. That means the only way to enter the actual city center would be through tunnels or through a bridge. And just explaining that, you will hopefully immediately think that, oh, well, there might be some bottlenecks creation into that because the road infrastructure is kind of limited. So what we were working with this company called Cbus, and they wanted to introduce a zero emission ferry going on the location that you see in this picture here. So from one side of the city, connecting the intercity areas in a better way. And they wanted to understand, is this a game-changing offer? What are the benefits of introducing such a mobility offer for the citizens? And how can we explore on different forecasts of population and workforces? Because there are different types of forecasts depending on who's doing the forecast, so to speak. So they wanted to explore a little bit and understand the impact of these different forecasts, to understand, like I said, if there's a business case for the city to introduce such an offer. So I'm going to go ahead and play a video again on what it looks like. This is the city of Bergen. What we do have is, again, the basis digital twin. We have the road networks. The different colors will give you an idea what type of road it is. And then we're introducing the Cbus on this area here that you can see in the video now. And now this is what we call a simulation. We run through, I can just pause a little bit. We run through a 24-hour traffic estimation. That means we're using all this data information. And when we say simulating, we're actually recreating the traffic volume happening in the real world. And when I hit the play again, you will see that these lines here, or what we call ribbons, will dynamically change and alter up and down. And that is represented by the actual traffic. So as you can see here in the middle of the picture, for instance, there is a yellow line, and that means the traffic is getting closer to maximum capacity. So you can easily visually see that now it decreases again. And now we have the same thing with the CO2 emissions. So you see there's actually quite a lot of emission going on, being these red lines in the screen. And so we want to understand, like I said, what is the impact? And I'm going to pause a little bit again. Sorry, I'm just going to go back for a few seconds, where we did a comparison. Sorry, this video is just jumping ahead. The point being, we're comparing different scenarios, that being when we do change some of the input parameters. So introducing this Cbus solution, what happens with the traffic? What happens with the traffic volume? What happens with the CO2? And we compare the results from the different scenarios to understand what are the consequences of this particular effort. So I didn't add a slide of all the kind of outcome from this case, but point being, there is a huge impact on the traffic volume and the CO2 when this type of transport offer is introduced to the city. So that means, well, we can conclude as a input to the business case of the customer that we were working on, that yes, there is a positive impact, like I said, both on traffic and CO2, and now they will take that result further on working and developing this mobility offer. So value being customers being able to run a mobility simulation, understand the impact, and taking that into further decision making for sustainable mobility offers. The next case I'm going to present to you is in a quite smaller city, being in Kristiansund on the west coast of Norway. They have this population around 22,000, and the case here is that they want to build a new campus area in the city center. And what does that mean? Well, you're actually adding 3,000 extra workplaces and students moving to the city center of this quite small city. And the question they wanted to understand in a broader extent is that could the current road network cope with this type of change? What happens when all these people are traveling to the new campus area in the morning for lectures and for work? And if it doesn't work, what can we do to make it work with the current road infrastructure? And again, I can just tell you before I start the video that the hypothesis is that, well, we actually think that the road close to the campus would have some capacity constraints, but it actually turned out to be capacity constraints somewhere else. And this is the kind of value that you can get from testing and running mobility simulation to identify bottlenecks and improvement potential, looking at the traffic from a system approach. So first thing that we're doing, adding the population, and this is here you can see the campus location, and we want to understand how the traffic will be impacted. We are putting in a model of the new campus. So you can see this is how it would be placed in the model. I can also say that, well, we have the possibility to have very high level detailed building models. We also, with all the white buildings around, those are more traditional models that we put in, but we have the possibility to put in very much detail. So you see, you can go on the street level and really get a spatial understanding of this new area. This is not the case in this, well, it's not the big point in this case, but just to give you an idea about that possibility. So now we're actually doing the traffic simulation. We just adjusted the population in the new area to be 3,000 more people. And now what happens when we run the traffic? So you see traffic is started to run in the morning. There we have the actual cars and buses and walking and biking population starting to travel and make their way to the new campus. And what we're seeing is that, well, if we look at the area, I'm just going to pause for a bit. What we actually see is the area in the middle of the screen now being the campus area. We see that, well, the road traffic is actually floating pretty well. You see that indicated by the green lines or the green ribbons, while it's up here in this area, it's blood red. That means the traffic is reaching its maximum capacity in the whole of this area, meaning the bottleneck in the traffic turned out to be somewhere else than what we originally thought. So we learned something already that, okay, where is the traffic congestions more likely going to happen? And then how are we going to deal with that when we have the moving of the new campus area into the city center? Being similar as in the Bergen case I just showed you, is somewhat of a bottleneck entering this part of the city, because this is just how the cities are built in the landscape. There are no other options of getting there into this new area. So what we wanted to do then, well, how could we alleviate that? What happens if we replace 15% of the car journeys with public transport? So then we would do what we call to test a new scenario, alter the input data, that being people traveling with a bus. There are no trains in this area, but by bus, or also they could be walking or bicycling, but at least they're not using their own car. And what we see then is that the traffic infrastructure could actually tolerate the volume. That means, and so the learning and value from this being, even though we see a traffic congestion or we see cars and the traffic queuing up, the solution is not necessarily to build more roads, right? We want to explore other options, other more sustainable options. And the result from here, like I said, could we get 15% of the population to use the bus opposed to their own car? Well, we actually have solved a traffic problem. So it's not the whole solution, but just to give you an idea about how a mobility simulation can help you to make decisions and understand all this type of data and information that you would need to make decisions like this. And the fact that we can actually recreate the traffic in this digital environment in a risk-free world really helps us to understand how to move forward, opposed to start experimenting with this in the real world. Next, or the last case I'm going to show on mobility is from another big city in Norway. There are actually two cases. The first video is quite short, but this is a case where they wanted to test out a new dedicated bus road system with electrical buses. And so what happens when you introduce this new way of traveling mode or mobility? So what happens also when we grow the population and increase the density of where people live, similar to what we were just showing in the previous case? But before we do any of those kind of future state exploring scenarios, we look at how the traffic system works today, and then we test what happens when we enter this new road system. And can we build something new without chaos in the traffic situation at all? So it's the same thing here. This is the new bus route that they wanted to introduce, but hey, there is actually some construction going on at the same time. So what we're doing is similar to the previous case. We run a few scenarios to understand the impact of what happens when some streets are closed, what happens when we introduce a new traffic line, how can we alleviate chaos and improve the quality of life of the people in Stavanger? And the point being, again, we iterate and run all these different scenarios or different situations to get knowledge on how to act and move further from what we have today into a future state. The next case I wanted to show you before I hand over to Sarnik and Dina for the last use cases. This is also from Stavanger. And this is slightly different. This is a longer case. It's not only about traffic. This is about a full journey to net zero. So traffic is a component of that, and then there are some other aspects included, just to give you an idea on how we can use a digital twin in a broader perspective than mobility. This is a visual of their Stavanger's U4SSC indicators. This explains which areas the city needs to focus on. And what we see from this analysis is that traffic is a major source of emission. So they should focus on tackling that, both, and we see road and sea traffic being the major emission source. So first of all, they should focus on tackling that, and then obviously also the other sources of emissions. So we see, looking at the CO2 emissions, there are quite a few hotspots in the traffic here, being the red areas here. So what happens if we change the travel habits or the travel modes, more or less, on the people? Introducing more electrical buses and electrical cars, we can clearly see that the impact on CO2 is decreasing. Now, taking that also by looking into the marine traffic, this is, as you can see on the red lines, it's very, very high. The marine traffic accounts for a lot of CO2 emission. Actually, this, if we were to compare, that red bar chart was the marine traffic, and it's so much more than the traffic emission from the land traffic. So taking it to the next level, like I said, if we wanted to understand the full city, so this is also into what Vito just explained on energy. So what if we did smart buildings and all the and renovation of all the city of Stavanger? Obviously, that's a long shot, but it would be needed for Stavanger on the route to net zero if they want to go there and really commit to those goals. And then what it's showing now is that if we were to do all these changes, making the city fully electrical, that would require a substantial energy supply. And we can add those components, looking at where we would get that renewable energy shown in the video. It could be tidal installation that we could add into the digital twin to understand that not only a smaller component being mobility, but also electricity usage and supply. The point is, even with all these measures, Stavanger would still be far from reaching net zero. So other things they could do is to look at kelp, for instance. It's the fastest growing plant in the world and has a very high CO2 uptake. But if they were to use seaweed and grow that as a solution for the CO2 uptake, this is the area that we're looking at for Stavanger in order to reach their net zero goals. So you see that in this green space in the seabed, it's actually twice the size of the city itself. So just to give you an idea about that mobility component being important by itself, but if you look at it in a larger perspective, it's also important, and it's possible to bring in other aspects as well, both to visualize and also to do what we call simulations to explore different alternatives.